Microsoft, kudos to the leaders of Microsoft. Um, they were able to successfully transition from a product to a services company without cannibalizing their existing products. I mean, they managed to actually move everything pretty much to Azure or online. So everybody probably you may or may not remember having to go and buy a box of software back in the day when I joined. Yeah, it just doesn't happen anymore. Now everything's online and you buy a subscription. So that was the idea behind moving from a product to a services company. And as part of that, open source is very important as well. And the main thing, there's a simple reason for why Microsoft embraced open source. It's just part of the world now. And if you want to be part of the world, then you have to work with open source software. And we have a cloud that allows you to run pretty much every kind of open source software. And we had to keep up with our competitors, specifically at the time, AWS. AWS was really, really doing well with their cloud, and something we had to catch up with. And I think we've done a pretty good job. So anyways, today I'm going to talk about unlocking developer innovation with Azure's open source ecosystem. I'll show you some examples and things. Here's our CEO, Satya Nadella, with a great quote: "Tech companies born with an open source mentality get it." That wasn't the case for Microsoft, but we did develop it eventually. It's our ability to work together that makes our dreams believable and ultimately achievable. And we learn to build on the ideas of others. So that's what we do. Not only are we big open source, as Ron mentioned, we're not just open source consumers, we're open source contributors as well. So we provide a ton of open source back to the Linux world, back to different applications. And these days, of course, AI. I've got to mention AI. I work for Microsoft, so I'm going to have to do that a little bit. I know there's another generative AI event coming up at Angelbeat, and that'll be covered in more detail, but I do want to mention that as well. It's something we do at Microsoft now. We own 49% of OpenAI, by the way. For those of you who didn't know that, it's a great investment we made. We believe in it, and it is definitely the future. And I'll show you some examples of that, actually. Okay, so Linux on Azure is our fastest growing platform. I'll give you some stats in a minute. Basically, we have databases and analytics as well. And we support pretty much every kind of open source protocol, application, database, anything you can imagine. We have the best-in-class Linux infrastructure available. 50% of our VM cores are Linux, and you can run Linux VMs on traditional CPUs or ARM processors as well, which saves a lot of time and money and a lot of energy too. So it's a very green technology. So we've been partnering with Ampere to provide ARM processors for our virtual machines and for Kubernetes. And we also have a ARM processor in the works for ourselves as well, being created by TSMC. And we more famously are collaborating with Intel in their new foundry business to build some GPUs that are going to be part of our cloud as well as early as next year. All right, so here's a little example. Daimler, they work with Java, Tomcat, Docker containers, Red Hat, Enterprise Linux, SUSE, and many others. And that's how they actually run their business now. And they run most of it on Azure. So that's an important thing to know. Here's a list of some of the top 100 customers that we have. This is not a complete list, of course, but you'll recognize some of the names there. So Ron, I'm going pretty quick because I know you want to wrap up today too on time. So let's talk a little bit about how Microsoft does open source. History of open source at Microsoft, 2001, we had shared source that was announced. I personally have worked with a little product called Fox Pro. We used to have a accounting software called SBT. And this is actually predates 2001. And SBT was a open source accounting software that you could buy and modify it as you saw fit. It's one of the first early open source packages out there. And then we actually created this thing called Coplex, for those of you who might have been around and remember that. That was sort of our predecessor to GitHub. And we contributed a lot of stuff over the years. I joined right about here, 2011, when Node.js was added to Windows. I was supposed to be a Java evangelist, they called them back then, but that wasn't considered enough work or enough of a market yet for Microsoft. They're still just dipping their toe in it. So they actually created Node.js, position for Node.js and Java, and that's how I joined. I was actually the program manager / evangelist for Node.js and Java at the time, working with a bunch of partners back then. So anyway, a little bit of ancient history there. We worked a lot with the World Wide Web Consortium, W3 Consortium, on building standards that could be compatible and making sure that Microsoft's interests were covered in those standards as well as our partners. And then, of course, we created the .NET Foundation and open sourced .NET back in 2014. We created our own, we had an OpenJDK contribution at that time too. And we actually now have our own version of OpenJDK for Java as well. And Visual Studio Code was launched in 2015, and that's open source on GitHub. I'll show you an example of that. And GitHub was acquired. So everyone thought that we were going to be basically, our motives were questioned a lot about why we purchased GitHub. And I think nobody's questioning it anymore. Not only is GitHub a stronger company because Microsoft bought it, and a lot of their products and services are now cheaper or free when they weren't before, but also we have some AI built into that now with Copilot and Copilot Chat, which is pretty amazing stuff. And as part of our GitHub acquisition, that's where we got the source for that as well. MS-DOS, yeah, you can get MS-DOS open source and available on GitHub. A little bit of trivia there for you. If you're interested, you can look that up. And we have 10,000 plus repos on GitHub as of today that you can go out and use. We contribute to open source, so we contribute a lot to Linux. We contribute a lot to Kubernetes. We're part of the Cloud Native Computing Foundation. We have Dapper and OAM. We're sort of the corporate custodians of Dapper, which is a sidecar application platform for building cloud resiliency and security. Helm, we actually support Helm as well as a corporate custodian. And Kata, which is a scaling Kubernetes platform. It's auto scale. And for data and AI, we have Spark and Yarn, which is a predecessor to other technologies. Postgres, Pandas, TensorFlow, ONNX. These are all the things we support. Just noticed, Java. We have our own OpenJDK. That's the thing I work with most of the time. Then we have Node, Python, Rust, Go, PHP, and actually many others. Then we have some web platforms too. The open source programs office that we have is the way that internally we keep track of how we can be a better open source citizen to the community and inside of Microsoft as well. So there's all kinds of internal resources for us. Say we want to open source a project on how to do that. But there's also open source resources for the public as well. If you go to opensource.microsoft.com/program, you'll see a lot of things that we have for bringing your own products to the open source world and good ways to keep them licensed and legal. So company-wide, we have a documented policy as part of the open source program office. And it's just for using open source, contributing, and releasing open source software. There's all kinds of guidelines and best practices there. In our open source ecosystem, different variants of Linux. We've got Red Hat. We partner with not just for Linux, but also for some of their platforms like OpenShift and JBoss EAP. Then we have, I just presented this morning, I'm actually in Atlanta right now. That's not where I'm based. I'm at a conference called DevNexus where I presented with Emily Jang on Open Liberty, which is a open sourced version of WebSphere that is free and available now. We did a presentation on how to set it up on Azure. So working with partners all the time, Oracle, IBM, Red Hat, others as well. And we also are participants and corporate custodians and board members of several foundations too. Visual Studio Code is a great example. So I mentioned in the timeline there, 2015, Visual Studio Code was released. A gentleman named Eric Gamma, based in Switzerland, created it for us, and we still have him on staff. If you go to code.visualstudio.com, you can download it. But I also want to show you something people don't know. Let me get over there. Let's see, one of these. There it is. VS Code is open source, and you can download it. You can check out the issues. You can see our pull requests. Everything's pretty much out in the open. You can't approve pull requests, but you can issue pull requests as well, and we can review them and discuss things with you. I don't know if the actions are still visible. Yeah, we still have actions, so you can see all the different actions we did and how things are going basically for building Visual Studio Code. This is when we get a new pull request. There's some automatic tests that come in, and we can evaluate these and see what's going on. So this is an example of how we are a great custodian and participant in the open source world. Oh, this job is skipped. I didn't pick a good one. But if you go into Microsoft/VS Code on GitHub, you'll find everything there is in VS Code. That's it. As some of the other ones I wanted to show you as well, if you go to Azure Samples, I did mention I'm going to mention AI. So Azure Samples themselves, we have Azure Search OpenAI demo. This is a multi-language open source VS Code. Let's see, it says Python, and there's several other languages, including JavaScript and others, that you can use with Azure OpenAI. So Azure OpenAI, I mentioned we own 49%. Microsoft owns 49% of OpenAI, and so we have a very, very, very close relationship with them. And this is an example of how to use OpenAI with something called retrieval augmented generation. So there's a little problem when you're using ChatGPT. It might not always give you the results you want. You might want to combine it with some results you have from internal information. So there's this thing called retrieval augmented generation, RAG, where you can provide your own documents on the side. And when a search is performed through the API, it will actually go and check your internal documents without exposing them to OpenAI and retrieve those documents alongside, or retrieve information in those documents alongside anything that's in your query from OpenAI/ChatGPT. And it helps provide more relevant information for you. You can train it, you can index it so that it provides just the right amount of information locally and the right information from OpenAI in general. So there's other things as well. There's OpenAI repository for OpenAI samples. There's cognitive speech. We've still got some blockchain hanging around there, and a few other things. But there's tons of OpenAI samples and other samples at azure-samples.com. What was I going to show you here? So the OpenAI demo I showed you. The services speech SDK, that's another good one. So these are all just a way to get you going faster with some of our services and products. Here's an Azure OpenAI chat front end, and it contains something called a lit implementation consisting of multiple lit elements that can be used to interact with OpenAI API, so you can create your own custom chatbots, and it uses TypeScript and a few other things, some web components, to build your own application quickly and easily with our OpenAI service. I mentioned Microsoft. So the Microsoft has a lot of things that you can use in the platform as well. And last but not least, I did want to show you. So this is Visual Studio Code. And I can do something here. For example, this is what Copilot and Copilot Chat looks like, just in case you haven't seen it. If I do Control-Shift-I and I say /explain, it's going to take, let me just delete that. It's going to take the current open file, this one right here, and it's going to tell me what it is. The code you provided is written in YAML format and represents a GitHub Actions workflow file. And it tells you exactly what this file will do. and you can fix it, you can update it, you can do things like that. If I do /fix, it's probably going to tell me that this one's okay because actually it was generated by Copilot. So to fix the code, accept, excerpt, you can make the following changes. It actually gives you the code that you can use for this. And it tells you about a vulnerability here. There's hard-coded credentials, embedding credentials in source code, risks unauthorized access, which is true. But one of the cool things about this is if you get a file, you can say insert in a new file. And now when you close the chat up here, I've got this, I'm sharing in Zoom, so you guys don't see this, but I do. There, okay. So there we go. So now you can see the file here, and I can actually save this file. It works with anything. Anything you can dream up, like how do I do this with Terraform? It'll do it for you. But you create, I use it personally for writing things I don't know a lot about, like GitHub Actions, YAML files for deploying to Kubernetes, Docker files, things like this, like building something with Maven just to check and see if there's anything missing or anything that's not quite working. So it's a really, really big help. This is all built with open source. So all of the open source license to be shared code on GitHub was used as a base to build patterns inside of here to enable Copilot and Copilot chat to make things work. All right. So open databases as well. We have a ton of open databases. You might have heard of Kaggle before. If not, check out kaggle.com. It's actually owned by a competitor, but I use it all the time for getting sample data. But we actually have our own sample data as well, like weather forecasts, a 15-day forecast from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Association, historical weather going back to 2008, public holidays. We have a bunch of databases that you can use to build your applications, including AI applications. And I already talked about GitHub. I showed you GitHub VS Code. It is part of our commitment to open source. And the ways you can use it with Copilot and Copilot chat these days is just amazing. And you can also deploy anywhere. So you can deploy on-prem to Azure, AWS, and the Google Cloud Platform from GitHub. We have built-in actions with CI/CD that you can use to deploy pretty much to any platform. Or if you don't like the way they're built, you can actually build your own. So, yeah. I think that's all I want to cover. So we have a powerful, flexible CI/CD. I mentioned that. Scalable enterprise workflow. Yeah, oh, actually, let me do this one real quick. So security is really, really important these days, especially with OpenAI and AI in general. If you're generating a lot of code, you need to check that code before you run it because you just don't know where it came from or, if it actually does the job. And one of the cool things in GitHub is we have automatic code scanning that'll find and fix vulnerabilities. And it's integrated with all of our other AI offerings as well. Microsoft also has a thing called a security copilot, which I'm always in trouble with because I write demo apps, and the demo apps, you can either write them securely or quickly. I tend to do it quickly because I'm in front of an audience. So I get all kinds of messages from our security copilot about problems that I'm causing. And then GitHub Mobile. GitHub Mobile is actually a pretty cool app. I literally used it this morning to turn on and off. There's a Windows Microsoft Azure app and a GitHub app. I used it to disable some things after I did a demo and shut down a Kubernetes cluster that I was using for that demo as well. So these are mobile apps that you really need to know about. But GitHub Mobile is extremely cool. And if you use it, when you go to log into GitHub, you'll have to authenticate through the GitHub mobile app, which is actually a kind of unexpected but very handy feature. Also, you can just check out any kind of issues you might have. If somebody pushed some code, you'll get notifications, stuff like that. All right, code spaces. Code spaces is something you can use as well, which it's a browser version of VS Code, basically. It's the easiest way to describe it. And you can use Copilot that I showed you earlier with that as well, with extensions. Okay, and that's me. So I think I wrapped it up in time, Ron. If there's any questions, I'm happy to take them.